Today I'm going to show you how I put together this display for some Stormcast models. I've been collecting Warcry teams for a while, and I thought I'd make a Stormcast only display using one of these collector's boxes that I found at Daiso for just $4. Now, as you can see here from the quick arrangement, I can fit all three of the Stormcast teams as well as some Gryph-hounds, which can be used with any of the teams onto the little display area. Now, the display does come with this nice little plastic cover, which you can print something out and do like a backdrop, but I don't know if I'm going to do that this time around. We're going to start things off with some really thin craft foam. This is just going to be kind of a top layer for the display. And I've already cut a couple of sections here that are going to fit over the two little shelves. Now, the models, I have magnetized them, and it's a decently strong magnet, so I picked up some of this magnetic sheeting from Michaels. It's not super strong with the magnet, but it will be enough to kind of keep them from moving around. So now that I've cut the magnetic strips, they do have a sticky side, but just to kind of make things hold a little bit more, we're going to cut some recessed areas out to kind of nestle the model bases into once they've been glued down. Now that fits pretty good, but once I've glued it down, it's going to be a little bit too snug, so I did eventually cut them a little bit bigger. Now the magnetic strip holds down pretty nicely. Didn't have to glue it once it was in place, which was super convenient. It can be a little fiddly, so just kind of, if you end up doing this method, just be really sure of where it is that you want it to go. Now, the craft foam was really nice in that it could just be super glued down super quick. It's just an instantaneous hold. But make absolutely sure of where you want it to go, because once it's glued down, you will not be able to separate it. It will tear off chunks before it separates. And that leads to a whole lot of extra cleanup. Alright, so now I'm just going to apply some tile grout filler. This is mostly going to create a sort of blended edge between the upper and lower tiers where the models are going to stand, and just give a little bit of texture for ground cover. Now, normally I would use this stuff to create mild elevations and things like that, just to keep it all from looking ridiculously flat, but since it's already got layers built into the display, I'm not really doing that. I'm focusing more on creating some rather specific kind of looking things. And I have some of these little large glass chunks that I got at the Dollar Tree. They were really cheap, and there was quite a few of them in the bag. I'm using them to just kind of create a couple of little boulders and fill some space that I'm not using a ton of tile grout. Now that will also help to make the grout dry a little bit faster. Instead of having to dry a huge clump of it, it's just drying the surface. Alright, so I decided to add a few more boulders, so I just grabbed a couple more chunks and I'm using a little bit of the grout to kind of wrap around it. This will keep me from having to glue them in. The grout will just kind of grab hold and just solidify them into place. Once that was done, I took the thing outside and let it dry in the nice warm air for about 3 to 4 hours. Once the grout was done, I did a quick little test fit just to make sure that the models would fit snug enough, and just kind of make sure that nothing was going to interfere with any of the details coming off the models, you know, no cloaks or weapons or tails hitting into anything just to make sure that I didn't have to make drastic changes right away. Alright, so I want some of the ground cover to kind of blend and look like the models were taken from this scenery beforehand. Now this is going to be a little bit tricky because I did do 3 different paint jobs for all of them. But we're going to start things off by kind of creating a little broken roadway here. And this is going to be done by using some crushed glass pieces that I got at Michael's. It was a little bit expensive to pick them up by comparison to some of the other stuff I'm using, but it was like $5-6 for a single jar, and I've got more than enough glass to do all kinds of different projects going on into the future, so I think it's a good investment to do once, and if you don't like it, well, then you're only out a couple of bucks. Now the wood glue I'm using is going to hold these in place really well, but it's not going to dry clear. But that's not really a problem since I'm already going to be painting over all of the ground texture anyway. But if you're looking to do this and have the appearance of the glass and you're not going to paint it, I would recommend maybe some super glue or a clear glue instead. That way you don't have to do any extra work. Now I'm going to use some slightly smaller glass chunks to create some rocks. I got these at the Dollar Tree. It was a fairly decently sized bag for $1.25, and they work so nicely for just little rock pieces. I cannot recommend them enough. Buy a bag, have enough for maybe a dozen or so displays, as long as you're not going super crazy. Now, I had a few extra leftover bits from a couple of statues, so I decided to throw them on there just to give a little bit of extra character. Now, I wanted a little bit more texture for the ground, just to kind of blend with some of the models that have sand on their bases. So, in a couple of areas, and definitely not over the entirety of the display, I put down a little bit more of the wood glue, and I'm just kind of spreading it out in irregular spacing just to kind of give a spot for some sand to grab hold of. Alright, now I'm going to let that fully dry before moving on to the next step. So after about an hour, everything was dry, but we've got some magnetic bits of sand that were stuck to the magnet strip. So using a vacuum, I just kind of picked up any of the loose, gritty sand that kind of clung together. And with that done, we can move on to the next step. So now we're going with our tried and true method of painting ground cover, and we're going to start that off with some burnt umber, and we're doing an all-over coat of all the pieces of the display. Now, I am taking some time to make sure that I'm painting the lip of the foam on the inside of all the cutouts, just to make sure that if you look down straight from the top of the models, you don't see the cut foam, you see what looks like the ground blending into the base. And I might even paint over this with some black at the end, just to make it blend with the base a little bit more. Once that was dry, I did a kind of medium dry brush of raw sienna over the entirety of the ground texture. Now I'm not worrying about any of the rocks getting the dry brush because I am going to paint them individually in just a moment. Once it's dry enough to touch, I'm going to use some Artist Loft Gray to paint over all of the boulders, rocks, the little broken roadway, and the damaged statue pieces. And once that's dry, we're going to do a light to medium dry brush on the boulders and a heavy dry brush on the statue pieces with a neutral gray, and then do a light dry brush over everything else with the neutral gray as well, just to give some highlights to the raised textures. Now I wanted a really kind of white, bright road work, so I'm doing a fairly heavy dry brush of titanium white over the statue pieces and the broken roadway. Now I'm going to color these a little bit with some washes, so they won't stay this color, but I really wanted that strong, bright undertone. And here you can see kind of a close-up look of the difference between the boulders and the roadways. Alright, so now for the boulders and the rocks, I'm doing a light-ish coating of Agrax Earthshade. This will give them a very, very nice earthy appearance. And now we're going to use some Athonian Camo Shade on the statue pieces as well as the broken roadway. Now I'm trying to go as light of a coating as I can just so that it doesn't become overpoweringly green. I wanted kind of like a almost mossy hue to it, and going just a very light dip of the brush seemed to achieve that. Then I'm going to go over all of the stonework with a light dry brushing of parchment. This will help bring back any of the highlighted raised edges that we lost when applying washes. Now I'm applying a very light layer of Agrax Earthshade on the roadway as well as the statue pieces. And I really liked how this turned out. It gave a nice earthy, mossy quality to it. Now we're going to mix up some kind of mossy ground texture by using some clear Elmer's glue and some ground cover flocking that I had. I can't really describe how to look for the right kind of texture. You just kind of eyeball it, and I went with slightly more glue consistency, just kind of like a paste, and then used a brush to kind of smush it down onto the terrain as I wanted, just to kind of give the impression of some mossy areas or some little bits of ground cover. And here we are with the finished piece. I am loving how this came out, and I think it's going to be a really nice way to display small armies or Warcry teams. So thank you all for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe for future content, comment in the comments section to let me know how I'm doing, and we will see everyone next episode.